This Penn State-Oklahoma State rivalry just got more intense.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State Wrestling, and as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day, the number one Penn State sports podcast out there. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show. He is Nate Cobler, Penn State Wrestling beat writer for the Center Daily Times. Links to his work will be down in the description. Well, this rivalry is certainly intensified here, Nate, to say the least. The transfer portal will do that. Having a former protege of yours take over one of the most iconic programs in history will do that. But we're going to talk about all of this because there's layers to this. Not just only Zack Ryder, but Thomas Gilman returning to the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. Penn State avoiding a prospective dual meet with Oklahoma State, that they don't want to do this. They're scared. We got to start with just the generality of this, how the rivalry has intensified, and we can go any direction with this. Alex Bacundo's now at Oklahoma State. Gary Steen's now at Oklahoma State. Zack Ryder's now at Oklahoma State. These are the Oklahoma State Nittany Lions in some sort of sense, but this was always going to happen. It's just a matter of when. It was never a matter of if, because David Taylor built so many connections, so many relationships at Penn State. And then now there's loose rumors that, hey, Cael and David, they have a mutual respect for one another, but it's not that same appreciation anymore. Like, they know that now business is business here. So this rivalry is only going to get more intense, and it didn't just start. This goes back to recruiting each other for Bo Bassett, even though he ended up at Iowa, recruiting against each other for Drayshawn Ross, Jax Forrest, and Rocco Welsh. So Oklahoma State and Penn State keep trading punches, and it's only going to get more intense from here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things where every year you look at college wrestling, there's three teams that you're looking at. It's Penn State, Iowa, and Oklahoma State. And when it comes to, this year particularly, you kind of saw a fallback from Iowa this year. I mean, granted, they lost one dual meet this year as a Penn State, but they lost that, and so now it's kind of turned into, now it's a two-horse race with Oklahoma State and Penn State. And so now you're seeing that on the recruiting front too, because, Oklahoma State got Jax Forrest. They got, the James kid that you just said about, so they're getting these other top recruits that Penn State could possibly get. But now you take that factor of David Taylor coming across and knowing what he knows from the Penn State room, taking it into the Oklahoma State room and kind of tweaking it to his own, right? He's had connections with some of these kids, with the whole M2 training center in State College, things like that. So he's built that rapport with some of these kids that are coming up through. And, there was rumors that Levi Haynes was going to go to Oklahoma State because of the attraction or the, camaraderie and the relationship that he's had with
that happened with Zack Ryder.
Yeah. So now that they're talking, with Zack Ryder going, is PJ Duke going to join him because they're so tight and things like that. So it's a matter of the whole transfer portal thing plays a big significant role in this, because if it wasn't for the transfer portal, you wouldn't be seeing this. It would be, it might be a guy, these guys might be staying here for the year, wrestling out the year, and then, all right, well, hey, look, I'm going to back out of this. I'm going to go somewhere else. And then they're showing up at Oklahoma State and all this other fun stuff. So it's going to be a sight to behold going forward because of the whole roster limit stuff, because of the whole transfer portal stuff, the NIL stuff, and the list can go on and on and on and on. And, when you have, in Zack Ryder's case, you have a guy like Rocco Welsh who transfers in from Ohio State, who could have been a national champion, but ran into the five-headed monster of Carter Starachi, we'll say, five-headed monster with his national titles. But, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? You can only have so many of these top-tier guys in your room at one point, and some of them, they'll sacrifice their time to sit and wait, which Zack Ryder did this year. So he felt, hey, I can start. I want to wrestle, but this is probably the most uncharacteristic thing that I think I've ever seen from Cael and the staff in the 9 years now that I've been covering the team, that they would, even pull, I don't even say pull something like this in this transfer portal, but to take and move away, I guess you maybe say, from a top-tier guy that you recruited there, and he came there because he wanted to be there in Ryder because that's who they say they want. They want the kids that want to be there. And you bring a guy in Rocco Welsh in who, he's proven what he has been. He wasn't wrestling this year, so does he come back to that same form where he was in the national finals, 2 years ago? So it's I guess you could say it's a bloodbath because anything is going to go.
I said in a few episodes ago that Cael and Penn State panicked in a sense because it was almost like you were hedging against David Taylor and Oklahoma State getting the services of Rocco Welsh. That, well, let's just bring him in, let's get him here, and then let everything, Zack Ryder's not scared of the competition. And that's not what I'm trying to apply is that, they were wrong and he was scared of the competition. That's not what I'm saying here, but you put everybody else's feelings aside, you put that integrity. If that's what we're going with, because the other rumor is that David Taylor was in his ear for as long as who knows. That's the other rumor. So some people are going to say that, Penn State and Cael Sanderson, they backstabbed Zack Ryder, and he should feel some type of way about that. It looks that way, but if there was something, even if Penn State had got the slightest indication that Zack Ryder was unhappy or that, David Taylor was recruiting him and that there was the possibility of it, you almost being a top tier program, you have to go and make a move like that because you don't know. If there's a possibility that your predetermined starter at 184 and maybe even cuts to, because Ryder could have been 174 after Levi Haynes moves on, you have Barr at 184, the Mirasola twins at 97 in heavyweight, that is your 4-year plan that David Taylor is kind of quietly working on behind the scenes, allegedly, that Penn State, you have to go and get a fish like Rocco Welsh in order to just potentially offset the possibility of that. And that's the chess match. That's the rivalry that we're talking about here.
Yeah, because if they take your chess piece and they put it into their lineup that you thought was going to be in your lineup and you don't have that replacement piece, it's going to be sorry about your luck. But again, it's, those things, Cael and them are always talking that they are, planning 2-3 years ahead and things like that. So who knows? Maybe they felt that with the whole transfer portal thing that if Ryder got unhappy, he was leaving anyways, even though how much he wanted to be at Penn State, saying he didn't beat Welsh in a wrestle off. Maybe they felt that he'd have been gone regardless. So that could be. It could not be. It's hard to say. Nobody's inside Zach's head and or Cael and them's heads other than themselves. So for us to kind of be like, well, they, this, that, and another thing, we don't know. But like with Cael and them, like I said, they're always saying that they're planning for 2-3 years ahead of time. So maybe they had an inkling that if he had a better offer or, things like that, maybe he was going to jump ship regardless. It's hard to say.
And when you are the number one team and you're trying to break records, you really can't take a back seat to anything. At the end of the day, I've settled on the fact that this is probably the best thing for all parties is that, hey, Rocco Welsh couldn't stay at Ohio State. He moves back to his home state of Pennsylvania, and Penn State once at one point in time recruited Rocco Welsh. So it's not like this is a completely strange wrestler, a guy that's completely outside of the system that would have never fitted in. He probably wanted to go to Penn State, but with 9.9 scholarships, it wasn't feasible. But Ohio State had an available scholarship, and it makes sense, right? And that's kind of the best option after the fact. So you kind of have to consider that there. But this rivalry is not going anywhere. It's only going to intensify more since it's so funneled. Because you mentioned it, it is Iowa, but Penn State wasn't competing against Iowa for Dean Peterson and Jordan Williams and Nasir Bailey and other prospective wrestlers. It was Rocco Welsh, and then it was trying to retain Zack Ryder, and maybe they had to fend David Taylor and Oklahoma State off for the likes of Levi Haynes. We'll never know. We'll never know that. But they're also since David Taylor has so many connections in Pennsylvania and he has access to the private jet, he's going to continue to fly back to the state and pitch his message because it's worked with Jax Forrest. And who's to say it's not going to work for it? It is going to work for other prospective wrestlers. Here's the final note on this part, and then we'll get to the Thomas Gilman situation. Is that Penn State, I don't know if we're ever going to see a situation where if it doesn't work out for a Penn State wrestler, they go to Oklahoma State. We're never going to see the inverse of that, where if it doesn't work out at Oklahoma State, they're going to end up at Penn State.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and you kind of have a good example this year where a guy in Terrell Barraclaw, he was at Penn State. He was at Penn State, all those years. He was a grad student this year, and he decided to go back home to Utah. No fault of his own. He knew what was in the lineup. He knew he probably wasn't going to see the lineup with everything that was going on. And so with Messenbrink being there, so he made his last year that he had, went out to Utah Valley and turned around and became an All-American, for Utah Valley. And it was great. Penn State fans were cheering for him every time he wrestled on the mats in Philly, and just the appreciation that he had for them and, things like that. It's like you said, you can see the guys at Penn State that might not maybe crack the lineup of Penn State. They move on, go somewhere else, and they have that type of story. We kind of talk about Nick Soriano. He was at Penn State's lineup. He was expected to be in Penn State's lineup, got injured, left, went to Rutgers, won a national title, and the success was there. So will we see that? Will we see likes of like a Rocco Welsh who will come in and it was at a top tier program in Ohio State? Can he have that success that he had there at Penn State? Because Mitchell Messenbrink, yes, he came from Cal Baptist. That's not a top tier, Division I program like Ohio State is. So, and Mitchell's doing what he's obviously doing. So it'll be interesting to see, if Rocco keeps that and maybe even gets better.
Well, David Taylor takes Penn State's wrestler, and Cael Sanderson responds with, well, we'll take your coach. It wasn't exactly like that, but it's still a massive domino to fall. We'll explain what this means, the impact, and how it went down on the other side of this break. And this is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. That is TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Thomas Gilman makes a shocking move, leaving Oklahoma State where it seems like he has it made. Friends with David Taylor, he's an assistant coach, and now he's giving all of that up to go back to the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, which in some sort of sense seems like a demotion, but it's more than that. This wasn't a chess move based on what I've heard. This happens to do with family connections, right? Your family's in Pennsylvania. I don't think he's going to lose money, right? He will be paid to be a part of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. Yes, he gives up that coach role, but he will still be a mentor. He will still be, he will be able to coach and train, and who knows, compete. He's just going to be a member of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. That is, it's huge for Penn State. So in a sense that, yeah, this just goes into the rivalry that he's not going somewhere else. He didn't get poached by another program to be, I don't know, a head coach or something like that. He is going back to the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. It helps Cael, it helps Penn State, and it hurts Oklahoma State. But this wasn't, I'm going to go poach your coach. It was, there's family connections, there's a personal factor here, and it makes sense for him that there's a spot at the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club that says, hey, you're welcome back anytime you want to be here.
Yeah, and I mean, what you're going to see here is you're going to see a possibility where you're going to see Penn State may start getting better later weight recruits because of a guy like Thomas Gilman and the success that he had in college wrestling and even, somewhat international wrestling as well. Is he maybe going to jump back into freestyle wrestling and competing? Who knows? It's hard to say, but, I'm interested to see what might happen out at Oklahoma State with him leaving because they had Dayton Fix with their wrestling club, and they also have Roman Bravo Young there with their wrestling club. So maybe they slide one of those two up into, an assistant coach role. I'm assuming Jimmy Kennedy's going to will move into Thomas's spot. And, that leaves another spot on the coaching staff there, so to speak. So does David, maybe try to keep that Penn State ties and bring Roman up as being assistant coach, as a Roman a coach type. Well, who knows? It's hard to say. Anything is possible. So it might be a good thing for Roman, but it also might be a good thing for Dayton Fix as well, because, he's had the success that he's had, and, he's had some international, results and victories there too. So I don't know. We'll see. That's what I'm more interested to see, kind of what happens there, because it seems like Penn State staff is well set now, with what Nick Lee and how he did this year as his first year as an assistant coach, and obviously Casey, Cody, and Cael are those three spearheads. So we talk about Zack Ryder and him leaving because of Rocco Welsh coming. I don't foresee anything like, hey, Thomas Gilman's coming. Is Nick Lee going to move? I don't see Nick Lee doing that, just because Nick Lee's love for Penn State is there, and everything like that. So I'm interested to see kind of what happens on Oklahoma's coaching staff side, to see who fills that void of Gilman leaving.
And like I said, it's just simply put, it's a positive influence for Penn State and not at Oklahoma State. And it's another Pennsylvania connection. It's another cog in the recruiting machine that can focus Iowa area. Maybe that played a factor in Drayshawn Ross. Who knows? I know that Gilman and Iowa aren't on good terms, but the state of Iowa and the ability to recruit, it's the connections, it's the relationships that you built. Gilman and the citizens of Iowa don't all hate each other, but Iowa University and Thomas Gilman may not necessarily get along. But but that's my point, is that, and what you said, to echo it, you get somebody that is just a positive presence, influence, that they're a part of the mat room. It's the same thing as having, because one of my biggest concerns is that Kyle Dake's going to follow David Taylor to Oklahoma State. Who knows if it's a coach role? Who knows it's just to be a part of the RTC? But the fact that Cael Sanderson, to an extent, not to an extent, he's offset that kind of exodus where, okay, Roman Bravo Young moves over. Thomas Gilman does too, but you get Thomas Gilman back. And Jimmy Kennedy was a close friend of David Taylor, so that was always going to happen. But to prevent, just to keep Kyle Snyder happy, to keep Kyle Dake happy, to keep, I know Jake Varner would never do something like that, but right, you just didn't have this attrition. A couple figures left. And let's point to Nick Lee. Nick Lee had a phenomenal first season as a true assistant coach. They went from, I know Luke Lillidahl is, as talented as he is, but you go from Braden Davis not placing, Aaron Nagao not placing, and Bo Bartlett finishing second, to Luke Lillidahl finishes third, Braden Davis finishes fifth, and Bo Bartlett finishes third, but he was 3 seconds away, granted, from either a second place or even an NCAA title, the first of his career. Who knows? But the difference was 3 seconds. Mm-hmm. That is a testament to Nick Lee to come right in, and Cael Sanderson to make that decision spot on when he's a young coach. Yeah.
And that there speaks volumes of Nick Lee, because in his first year as a true assistant coach, to see the kind of turnaround there, you could say turnaround, like you said about those later weights, to come around and have those guys all place in all 10 that Penn State had. If he continues to do that, you're going to start probably seeing schools looking to Nick Lee as a head coach. And for a guy like that who didn't really seem to wanting to wrestle freestyle and be on the Olympic stage or the international stage, hey, if you want to still stick in wrestling, and dude, the way you're connecting with these kids already, because granted, most of these kids were his teammates, most of these guys were his teammates, you continue that type of relationship with guys, you continue to flourish in that type of a role, you're going to start seeing Nick Lee's name pop up as he continues to get more and more experience for openings down the line. So for him, it's a great testament, like you said, to for your first year, you take Penn State that had no guys place in their lower two weights, and here they are 3 and 5, and then the guy that was at your weight class, was behind you, so to speak. He comes in and he finishes third as well, and had, like you said, another chance. He had a chance to be back in the finals. It's kudos to Nick Lee, and just the ceiling is so high for him in what he can achieve, down the line as a head coach or continuing as an assistant coach.
So Cael Sanderson hit a home run there by promoting him, making him the official assistant to take over Jimmy Kennedy's spot. Because remember, Thomas Gilman was not on staff. David Taylor was not on staff. They were positive influences that were doing their own thing, but they were there to help spar, train, whatever have you, and just be, again, Carter Starachi talks about how I got to go up against Kyle Snyder. And there's, there's nobody better that you're going to go up against in battle and practice. So then all the other matches are easy. It's the same thing. To a case in point of Zack Ryder, I watched his recent interview with Bo Nickel, which is that's such a weird dichotomy right now. I have so many mixed feelings about that because I know that interview was done further in the past, but he talked about, I got to go up against Kyle Dake. And it's, that's why Penn State is such a premier destination because of and David Taylor's trying to do this too, is get so many talented athletes, wrestlers, people who do this in and around the RTC program, like Cael Sanderson did, built the foundation, and then go from there.
Yeah, because if you have that solid foundation in your RTC program, you see a guy in Ono, Japanese wrestler, who has now decided he's going to join Penn State and he's going to wrestle, folk style after having such a phenomenal freestyle career
already,
international already. And so if you continue to build, like you said, Kyle Snyder's there, Kyle Dake's there, Jake Varner's there, you have Cael there. If you build that foundation in your RTC, which allows your non-club, we'll say NLWC is a club. Yeah. It allows your collegiate athletes to compete against these guys and go up against these guys, like Carter said in his interview with ESPN. When he's in practice, he's going against the best in the country. So when he's out wrestling on a wrestling mat against Big Ten opponents or collegiate wrestlers, he feels like that's nothing because of what he's going through in the wrestling room. So, when you have that foundation, that strong foundation in your RTC program, now granted, not every school has an RTC program, but when you have that type, that's a recruiting chip that you use to your advantage to pull these people in. And again, like I said, we see this Ono coming in. And Oklahoma State, they had a Japanese wrestler too that they threw out in one of their matches here at the tail end of the year. So
Sakamoto. Yep.
Yeah. So, we're talking that this could potentially bring not only nationally, but internationally as well.
And another extension of the rivalry, because it seems like Penn State and Oklahoma State are out in the forefront of that, trying to expand beyond just the United States. So that's something else. That's just another category to keep an eye on of where, hey, who's going to land the next punch? And it could be either. And I would say it's Penn State, advantage Penn State because of going and getting Masanosuke Ono to be in the mat room, even just as a freestyle wrestler is massive. Even if he wasn't going to be on the collegiate team, just as a freestyle, it's the same thing. It's getting Thomas Gilman back. It's just getting another positive influence, a competitor. Iron sharpens iron, man. And that's what Cael's going off of. But in the process of all of this, Cael and Penn State are scared to wrestle Oklahoma State. That's at least what's being talked about here. The Penn State-Oklahoma State dual meet. Everybody would be for this except Penn State. Well, we'll explain why that could be the case after a word from our sponsors. The Penn State-Oklahoma State dual meet, this would be a sellout in Beaver Stadium. I would very much, I think that's where it should start, that you try to match the Kinnick duel that Iowa and Oklahoma State did, and you would shatter the attendance record. I think Iowa had 40 to 45,000. Penn State, if they did that in Beaver Stadium to begin the season, but now you have the national duels. But if you had that in Beaver Stadium, you would have, I'd say at a minimum 50,000, but we could be talking 60, 70,000. Would it sell out all 100,000 seats in Beaver Stadium? Probably not, no. But I think the expectation should be 70,000. Besides the point there, Penn State's shooting for the stars if they're going to try to pull this off. But now the national duels complicate things because where you would have that type of event at the beginning of the season, because you can't do that in the middle of winter. You have to do it at the end of October, early November. But now the national duels are there that David Taylor went to fight for, to go get, to host in the state of Oklahoma. So now that's an issue. And then it goes back to what Cael has always said about the national duels and about anything else, is that, well, we wrestle in the Big Ten Conference. We have all these great events with the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. Why do we need to go out of our way to create all this other unnecessary competition? You can call it fear if you want, but Penn State will eventually wrestle Oklahoma State at the NCAA tournament as it is and prove who's better there individually. So the dual meet, it's on hold for now. It doesn't seem like anybody has any confidence in it. I thought it was going to happen in this was a possibility, maybe 2026. But now with the national duels being in there, you're going to miss out on the Beaver Stadium aspect of it. I think there's more logistics involved as far as, well, Cael doesn't want to do it. I think it has to do with logistics.
Yeah, and we were talking a little bit before, when they wrestled each other in the years past, it was when the national duel championships were going on. And, there was obviously big hoopla. It was, the best of the Big Ten against basically the best in the country and, things like that. And, now that those duels went away, that they're trying to bring it back, but Cael and them feel like yes, they enjoy duels, right? They enjoy duels, but their main focus is March. That is their focus. Yeah. They don't care about anything else but March, because you're not remembered for winning dual titles. You're remembered for winning individual national championships and team titles, you could say, at the NCAA championships. So for them, they don't feel it's maybe part of their training regimen, well, I guess you could say, okay, because they're trying to focus from the ground up and making sure that these guys are peaking at the right time. You don't want them peaking at the beginning of the year, because then it's going to tail off towards the end of the year, where that's the most important piece. I think we've heard Cael and them say the Big Ten is the Big Ten. It's the SEC of college wrestling, pretty much. And so why, if we have all of this, like you touched on, if we have all of this tough competition within our conference, why do we need to go outside of our conference?
What's the point?
What's the point? We don't need to go outside of our conference. Now, Iowa does it, I think, with Oklahoma State just because of that history and that nostalgia. But Penn State doesn't have a history and a nostalgia. They do with Lehigh, you could say, because it's such a long rivalry and history. But they don't have it with anybody else. It's all the Big Ten, and the Big Ten is the Big Ten. So they feel, why should we have to go out of our way to get competition when we have it within our own conference? We're getting it every weekend anyways. So do they go and compete in the journeyman collegiate duels? That's, I think, just to give them a different feel for other teams not within the conference, because they
hypothetically both of them could enter at the collegiate duels.
They could, but you're not going to see the tournament director of the collegiate duels put them in the same thing, because you're not going to draw, you're going to draw everybody to that. You're not going to have a draw for the entire thing, like is what you want to have with one of those types of programs that you're putting together. So yeah, they could get into it, but if if you're the tournament director or the program director, you're not going to put Penn State and Oklahoma State in the same thing. That's why you saw Penn State and Missouri this year, because you're not going to see that. You're not going to see that. You'll see Penn State Binghamton, because Binghamton has come to Penn State times and wrestled. You'll see who else did they wrestle? Penn State and Little Rock. You're not going to see that. Yeah. You're not going to see that. You have those types of events to see matchups you're not going to see. And yes, will the national collegiate duels have that? Absolutely. But again, with Penn State's regimen, they want to slowly and gradually build these guys up so that way they're at their best at the end of the year when it matters the most.
I'm not going to argue with Cael's formula, because it certainly works. So whatever he wants to do, stick to the science, stick to the plan. And it's also, again, if you go to the national duels, this is another, I guess, tangent of a point that we've already made. You're going to wrestle a lot of the same teams, most likely. I don't know exactly the format of how the duels would work, but let's just say, okay, you take 16 teams and you have a tournament. for example. Penn State's number one. They're probably along the way going to wrestle, 2 or 3 other teams that you see in your regular season dual meets.
Exactly.
You could face Iowa twice. You could, and it's great for the fans. It's great for the reporters. I totally get that. But is it necessary when you're already going to wrestle them later on? You could go through a gauntlet of Ohio State, Minnesota, and Iowa in the finals. It's no guarantee that Penn State and Oklahoma State meet, but that could be your path. And wait, you just did that in a weekend when you do that in the middle of January and February.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and that's just it. Like I said, I just said Big Ten wrestling is the equivalency of SEC football. And you see it every year in the SEC in football, how much these teams beat each other up and how much there's a war of attrition basically there. Now, when it comes to wrestling, obviously it's not as physical as football is. It's still physical, but not as physical. But you have the idea of why beat these guys up? Why beat these guys up and have them, again, not being at their best when it matters most at the end of the year? Because you're going to face some of these teams anyways. And, Penn State goes through the Big Ten schedule, and they go through and they beat up everybody anyways. So what's the sense of seeing the beating up early when you can see it throughout the year? If you saw it once at the beginning of the year, do you really think you're going to want to go sit and watch it again? Nothing's going to change unless somebody gets hurt here or there for Penn State or any of the other schools that they'd have wrestled in the duels. So it's just one of those things like why do you see it now when you can see it later?
Either way, I don't think we're ever going to get a consensus on that, because we're going to say all of this, and there's still going to be a portion of people that say, well, they're still avoiding the competition, they're still afraid of it, and they don't want to risk it because it throws a wrench into their plans for the NCAA tournament. Whereas David Taylor's like, yes, we will do it. I say the only way you do it is if you can make this a historical spectacle. If you can get this into Beaver Stadium, if you can get the logistics to work out, that's where it's worth it. But if the national duels are going to take precedence, then so be it. That's this, because if you get a dual meet like this, you can sell out a football. It's to an extent. You can set a record for an attendance in a football stadium, whether it's at Oklahoma State or Penn State. And that's where I think it's worth it, because at the end of the day, it's just a non-conference opponent. What makes Oklahoma State any different from Northern Iowa? What makes them different in the case of Penn State, scheduling purposes? But that's why, yes, Oklahoma State's different from the storylines and everything else, which is why you put it in Beaver Stadium, which is why you try to put it into a football arena at Oklahoma State. So be it. We'll see what actually happens here, but it's probably not going to happen for the near future, maybe in the distant future. And that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. That is Nate Cobler from the Center Daily Times. His work will be down in the description. I highly encourage everybody to go check it out. Also, let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Your feedback, your questions, your analysis of this is also appreciated. If you're new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast. Nate, thanks so much for the time as always, and can't wait to talk to you again in the not too distant future about Penn State wrestling.
Sounds good, buddy. Thanks for having me again. Hope all's well.
And again, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, got to check out Locked On NFL Draft with hosts Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as your favorite collegiate players, your favorite former Penn State Nittany Lions. Get ready for the next level. Get the latest draft rankings, rumors, news every single day. You can find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day.